Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not listening to a story about conquest, rebellion, or dramatic wars. Tonight, we're following a woman who was never meant to matter. A concubine who quietly passed through palace gates, disappeared from history, and then, without raising her voice, became the only woman to ever rule China as emperor. This is the story of Wu Zetian, not told through battles or scandals, but through silence, patience, and the calm machinery of power that moved while everyone else slept. We'll drift through candlelit corridors of the Tang Dynasty, forgotten records, watchful palaces, and an empire that learned how to breathe under her rule. This is not a story meant to excite you. It's a story meant to slow you down, to let history unfold gently, the way it once did at night. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let the palace grow quiet, and allow this forgotten chapter of history to carry you into rest. In the Tang Dynasty, thousands of young women entered the palace every year, brought in quietly from noble families, provincial clans, and forgotten villages, their names recorded briefly by scribes who never expected to write them again. Most were not chosen for beauty alone. They were chosen for obedience, for silence, for the simple fact that they could disappear without consequence. In a world where power wore robes of gold and spoke through emperors, these women were meant to become background, part of the architecture of the court itself, like painted screens or carved pillars, seen but not remembered. Among them was a girl named Wu Zetian. Her arrival did not shake the palace. No bells rang, no historians paused. There was no prophecy written about her birth, no omen recorded in the stars. She entered the palace the way countless others had before her, quietly, carrying nothing but her name and the expectation that it would soon fade. At this point in history, there was no Wu Zetian. There was only a concubine in waiting, one among many, whose future appeared already decided. The imperial court of the Tang Dynasty was not a place that rewarded ambition, especially not in women. It rewarded predictability. It rewarded those who understood when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. The palace was vast, but it was also narrow in its rules. Women existed there to support the visible structure of power, not to shape it. Records from the time barely mention Wu Zetian's early days, and that absence is meaningful. History often remembers those who disrupt systems, but it rarely remembers those the system believes it has already contained. Wu Zetian was supposed to vanish into routine, morning rituals, evening silences, a life measured by seasons rather than choices. The court expected her to be like the others, present, useful, and ultimately forgettable. Yet what makes this moment so important is precisely that nothing seems important about it. There is no drama here, no tension, no warning signs. This is the calm beginning of a story that almost never happened. Wu Zetian's early life in the palace teaches us something subtle about power. Before it is visible, it is invisible even to those who hold it. She observed a world that did not see her as a participant. She listened more than she spoke, learned the rhythms of court life, the habits of those above her, the quiet anxieties of those around her. The palace was always listening, always watching, but it rarely imagined that it too was being studied. At this stage, Wu Zetian was not resisting her fate, she was absorbing it, and that, perhaps, is why history did not expect to remember her. Life inside the Tang Palace moved slowly, but it never stopped watching. Days were marked not by freedom, but by routine. Fixed hours, repeated gestures, carefully observed behaviors. For a young woman like Wu Zhao, survival depended less on action and more on restraint. She learned quickly that the palace did not punish mistakes loudly, it erased people quietly. A wrong word spoken to the wrong person could end a future before it had ever begun. And so, Wu Zhao learned the art of being unremarkable. She did not compete for attention. She did not rush to impress. She did not behave as if she expected to be chosen. Instead, she watched. She noticed how power flowed without announcing itself, how decisions were shaped long before they were declared, how the most influential figures rarely raised their voices. The palace rewarded those who blended into its rhythm, who became predictable enough to be trusted and invisible enough to be underestimated. Wu Zhao understood this instinctively. She allowed herself to become part of the background, not because she lacked ambition, but because the background was where one could see everything without being seen. The women around her spoke in whispers, traded rumors, speculated about favor and downfall, but Wu Zhao listened more than she spoke. She understood that information in the palace was not something one possessed openly. It was something one absorbed quietly, like warmth from a wall that had been standing in the sun all day. Over time, she learned the patterns of the court. When the emperor was calm, when tension lingered in the corridors, when servants moved faster than usual. These small details were invisible to most, but Wu Zhao collected them patiently. Nothing about her suggested danger, and that was precisely her advantage. In the Tang court, danger was expected to announce itself. It came dressed in ambition, arrogance, or defiance. Wu Zhao offered none of these. She was respectful, observant, and careful. To those above her, she appeared compliant. To those beside her, she appeared distant. To history, she appeared absent. Yet beneath this stillness was a growing understanding of how systems maintain themselves. Wu Zhao began to recognize that the palace was less a place of absolute authority and more a network of habits, fears, and unspoken agreements. Power did not rest solely in the emperor's hands. It lived in routines, in expectations, in the quiet cooperation of those who believed the system was unchangeable. By becoming someone the system ignored, Wu Zhao gained the rare freedom to study it. She learned when silence protected and when it invited danger. She learned that patience was not passivity, but preparation. In this phase of her life, nothing outwardly changed. There were no promotions, no sudden rises, no moments that would later be quoted by historians. And yet, this was the period that shaped everything. Wu Zha was not waiting for opportunity. She was learning how opportunity quietly arrives. She was becoming fluent in stillness. And stillness in the palace was never empty. It was full of observation, memory, and timing. Long before she would ever be remembered, Wu Zhao mastered the skill that allowed her to remain forgotten. And in doing so, she survived a world designed to erase her. For a time, Wu Zhao existed exactly as the palace intended. She was present, yet unnoticed, useful, yet replaceable. Her name appeared in records only when necessary, and even then, without emphasis. In the vast machinery of the Tang court, she was a small, quiet component, functioning, obedient, and expected to fade with time. Then, as quietly as she had entered, she disappeared. When Emperor Taizong died, many of the women who had served him were sent away from the palace, removed from political life, and reassigned to religious institutions. This was not considered a punishment, it was considered closure, a way of sealing the past so that the future could move forward without complication. Wu Zhao was among them. Her departure did not disturb the court. No one protested. No one argued that she was indispensable. She was sent to a Buddhist convent, a place designed not for ambition, but for silence and forgetting. To the court, this was the end of her story. A woman without rank, without family power, without allies, removed from the center of history and placed somewhere history rarely looked. For most people in her position, this transition marked a permanent disappearance. The convent was meant to dissolve identity, to replace personal desire with routine devotion. Days passed there without consequence, without audience, without record. And yet, this disappearance is one of the most important moments in her life, because what looks like an ending is often only an interruption misunderstood by those watching from the outside. Wu Zhao entered the convent without resistance. She did not fight the decision. She did not demand reconsideration. In the quiet of religious life, she continued doing what she had always done, observing, listening, and remembering. The world had narrowed, but it had not ended. The palace believed it had erased her. History believed it had lost her. But Wu Zhao had learned something essential. Removal from power does not always mean removal from relevance. Silence once again became her shield. The years in the convent were slow, repetitive, and deliberately uneventful. That was their purpose. They were meant to empty her of ambition, to smooth away whatever individuality remained. But stillness has a way of preserving what noise destroys. In a place where nothing happened, Wu Zhao learned endurance. She learned how time reshapes people who stop fighting it. She learned that forgetting is not always final. When people assume a story is over, they stop paying attention. And it is in that absence of attention that change quietly waits. At the end of Chapter 1, Wu Zhao does not stand victorious. She does not claim power. She does not even remain visible. She leaves the palace behind as someone the world believes it will never hear from again. This is the version of Wu Zhao history expected. A footnote that fades, a life redirected into quiet obscurity. And as the convent doors close behind her, the story seems to settle into silence. The girl no one was supposed to remember has at last been forgotten. Or so it seems. The palace did not reward ambition. It never had. Ambition was loud, visible, impatient. And the Tang Palace had learned long before Wu Zhao ever arrived that the most dangerous people were not those who wanted power openly, but those who learned how to wait without revealing what they wanted. The palace was quiet, but it was never still. Beneath its painted roofs and silk curtains moved a constant current of attention. Every glance lingered longer than it should. Every silence was weighed. Every routine gesture was noticed by someone, somewhere. This was not a place designed for romance, despite what later stories would suggest. It was designed for observation. The women of the inner court were not merely companions or ornaments. They were variables in a system that measured loyalty, stability, and risk. The palace functioned like a living archive, recording behavior not in ink, but in memory. Servants remembered who spoke too freely. Eunuchs noticed who listened too closely. Senior consorts observed patterns forming long before they became threats. Nothing truly disappeared here. It was only stored. Wu Zhao, whether she understood it fully or not, moved through a world that was always watching. Even when she was no longer physically present, her absence itself became a data point. The palace remembered who left quietly and who resisted removal. It remembered who faded and who struggled against fading. In this way, silence carried meaning. It was not emptiness, it was evidence. Inside the Tang court, being quiet did not mean being safe, but it did mean being measurable. The system trusted what it could predict. It feared what it could not. Wu Zhao's strength at this stage lay in her consistency. She did not disrupt the patterns, she flowed within them. She allowed herself to be read as stable, compliant, and ultimately unremarkable. That interpretation mattered because the palace was less concerned with morality than with control. It watched not for goodness, but for deviation. The concubine system itself was built on this principle. Women were placed into ranks, roles, and routines not to elevate them, but to contain them. Every interaction served to reinforce boundaries. Who could speak to whom? Who could move freely? Who remained confined to shadows? Romance, if it existed at all, was secondary to surveillance. Love did not grant protection, predictability did. Wu Zhao learned this without being taught. She learned that attention was a currency she did not want to spend too early. She learned that being noticed often meant being judged, and being judged rarely ended well. The palace watched everything, but it reacted slowly. That slowness was deliberate. It allowed information to accumulate, patterns to form, conclusions to solidify before action was taken. By the time the system responded, it believed it understood the situation completely. This is how the palace maintained order, not through force alone, but through memory. Memory was its true weapon, and Wu Zhao, in her early years, gave it very little to remember. That absence of disruption was precisely what allowed her to remain within its field of vision without triggering its defenses. She became part of the quiet background hum of court life, noticed, recorded, but not flagged. The palace was quiet, but it was watching, and Wu Zhao, unknowingly, was learning how to exist inside a system that never stopped looking. Over time, the palace began to organize its observations, not consciously, but instinctively. People were remembered not as individuals, but as patterns. Someone was known as reliable, another as volatile, another as silent but attentive. These impressions were not written down, yet they shaped decisions more powerfully than official records ever could. Within the inner court, memory functioned like an invisible hierarchy, layered beneath the visible one. Titles and ranks explained where a person stood publicly, but memory determined how they were treated privately. Wu Zhao existed almost entirely within this invisible layer. She was not associated with drama or disruption. She did not attract alliances, nor did she provoke rivalries. Her presence did not trigger concern. And so, the system categorized her gently, almost lazily, as stable. This categorization mattered more than any temporary favor ever could. In a palace obsessed with balance, stability was valuable. It meant predictability. It meant low risk. The women who rose quickly often fell just as quickly because they forced the system to pay attention. Wu Zhao did the opposite. She allowed attention to drift past her, while quietly observing how others were sorted, remembered, and eventually constrained by their own reputations. She noticed how small behaviors accumulated meaning, a repeated hesitation, a pattern of impatience, a tendency to speak before listening. Over months and years, these details hardened into identity. The palace remembered people the way water remembers the shape of stone, slowly, persistently, without emotion.
Wu Zhao understood that once the system decided who someone was, it rarely reconsidered. This made first impressions dangerous and consistency powerful. By remaining consistent, she prevented the system from redefining her. In this way, memory became both a prison and a shield. Those remembered too clearly were trapped by expectation. Those barely remembered were allowed to move quietly within the margins. The inner court functioned through layers of indirect control. Orders were rarely explicit. Influence traveled through suggestion, omission, and timing. Wu Zhao observed how senior figures rarely issued commands. Instead, they waited for circumstances to make the desired outcome appear inevitable. This was how the palace shaped reality without appearing to intervene. Silence, again, was the medium through which power traveled most effectively. Wu Zhao did not resist this system. She studied it. She learned that speaking less did not mean knowing less. Often, it meant knowing more. She learned that visibility was not synonymous with importance. Those most visible were often the most constrained. Those least visible retained flexibility. In the quiet rhythm of palace life, Wu Zhao refined her understanding of human behavior under surveillance. She saw how people adapted themselves to what they believed was being watched. Over time, they became performances of their own reputation. Wu Zhao avoided this trap by offering very little performance at all. She allowed others to define themselves loudly, while she remained undefined. This undefined state was uncomfortable for the system, but not alarming enough to provoke correction. And so she remained, observed, categorized, and underestimated. The palace continued to watch, but it did not yet understand what it was seeing. That misunderstanding would matter later. For now, it simply meant that Wu Zhao existed in the narrow space between attention and neglect, a space where memory was faint and therefore forgiving. In a world governed by observation, being only partially remembered was a rare and subtle form of freedom.
Eventually, something subtle shifted inside the palace. Not an event, not a scandal, not a decision recorded by historians. It was quieter than that. It was a pause, a moment when memory hesitated. The system that had been so confident in its classifications began to notice an absence that felt incomplete. Wu Zhao was gone from the palace, removed as expected, yet her removal did not settle the way others had. Most departures closed a chapter cleanly. This one did not. Her absence did not erase her presence. Instead, it left behind a faint outline, like a space in a pattern that had not been filled properly. The palace had watched Wu Zhao closely enough to know she was stable, but not closely enough to know her fully. That gap mattered. In a system built on observation, uncertainty was uncomfortable. The palace did not miss her emotionally, it missed her structurally. She had fit too smoothly into the rhythm, left too little trace, and therefore created a silence that did not behave as expected. This kind of silence drew attention not because it was loud, but because it failed to resolve. The palace was accustomed to forgetting. It was not accustomed to unfinished forgetting. Somewhere within the layered memories of the court, Wu Zhao began to exist not as a person, but as a question left unanswered. Why had she been so easy to remove? Why had she caused no disturbance at all? Why did her absence feel different from disappearance? These questions were not spoken aloud. They did not need to be. They lingered quietly in the way memory sometimes does, without words, without urgency, but with persistence. The palace continued to function. Routines remained unchanged. Power moved along familiar paths. And yet, something had been added to the system, a small, unresolved note.
Wu Zhao had not challenged the palace, she had not defied it, she had simply passed through it in a way that resisted conclusion. In doing so, she revealed something important about how the palace truly worked. It was not threatened by rebellion, it was unsettled by ambiguity. The system depended on clarity, on knowing who people were, where they stood, and how they would behave. Wu Zhao disrupted none of these directly. Instead, she left behind a memory that could not quite be categorized, and that memory, faint as it was, remained active. It did not demand action, it waited. This is how the palace watched, not with constant attention, but with selective recall. When circumstances shifted, when familiar patterns no longer explained new realities, the system reached back into its memory for references. It searched for figures that had once existed outside expectation. Wu Zhao's name did not surface yet, but the space she occupied remained. At the end of Chapter 2, nothing appears to be happening. The palace is quiet, the system is stable, Wu Zhao remains absent. And yet, the palace is watching more carefully than before. It has learned that silence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes it means something has been set aside rather than erased. The palace does not yet know why this matters, but it will remember that it noticed. And in a world governed by memory, being noticed, even faintly, was never meaningless.
When Wu Zetian disappeared from court records, most historians assumed her story was over. History is accustomed to endings that arrive quietly. It accepts absence as resolution. Names vanish from documents, and with them, entire lives are folded away as if they had reached their natural conclusion. For women in imperial China, especially those without surviving sons or powerful families, disappearance from official memory was not unusual. It was expected. Wu Zetian's removal from the palace and reassignment to a Buddhist convent fit neatly into this pattern. To the outside world, it appeared final. She had fallen out of favor, stepped beyond the threshold of political life, and entered a space designed to absorb people into anonymity. The court no longer spoke her name. Records moved on. Power continued without interruption. And yet, this apparent ending concealed something essential. What history mistook for erasure was in fact a transition. The Buddhist convent was not a prison, but it was not freedom either. It was a place of deliberate quiet, where time slowed and identity softened. Days followed a rhythm meant to empty the mind rather than sharpen it. Prayers replaced conversations. Routine replaced ambition. The convent's purpose was to dissolve attachment to the self, to desire, to the world that had been left behind. For many, this worked. Over time, memory faded. The palace became distant. The person they once were dissolved into repetition. Wu Zetian entered this space carrying years of observation with her. She did not resist the silence. She had already learned how to live inside it. But this silence was different. It was no longer enforced by surveillance. It was sustained by distance. The court was no longer watching her daily movements. The system that had measured her behavior had turned its attention elsewhere. This absence of observation created a new condition. For the first time, Wu Zetian existed outside immediate scrutiny. History often assumes that power only grows in proximity to authority. But there is another kind of growth that occurs in removal. In the convent, Wu Zetian was no longer reacting to the palace. She was no longer adjusting herself to expectations.
She was simply enduring time. Endurance changes people quietly. It strips away urgency. It clarifies what remains when ambition has nowhere to go. In the slow repetition of religious life, Wu Zetian's mind did not empty, it settled. Memory did not weaken, it reorganized. She reflected not on what she had lost, but on what she had learned. The palace had taught her how systems remember and forget. The convent taught her how time reshapes identity when no one is watching. To historians scanning records centuries later, this period looks like absence. Years pass with little documentation, no notable events, no trace of political relevance. But this interpretation assumes that significance must always announce itself. In reality, some of the most consequential transformations occur where no one thinks to look. Wu Zetian's disappearance from history was not the end of her story. It was the moment the story moved inward, away from spectacle and toward endurance. Falling, in this sense, was not collapse, it was compression. The world believed she had been removed. What it did not see was that she had entered a phase where nothing distracted her from understanding herself, time, and the systems that had once defined her. This chapter of silence would not make sense until much later. For now, it simply reads as an ending. And that is why it was so easily overlooked.
Life in the Buddhist convent was intentionally unremarkable. That was its design. Nothing here was meant to stand out. Days were shaped by bells, chants, and routine movements that repeated until they lost their edges. For those sent here from the palace, this sameness was meant to dissolve the past. Identity softened. Names mattered less. Memory, for many, slowly faded into a gentle blur. Wu Zetian moved within this environment without resistance. She did not mourn the loss of court life outwardly. She did not cling to former status. She allowed the rhythm to carry her, knowing that rhythm had once protected her before. Yet beneath the calm surface of religious routine, something subtle was happening. The absence of surveillance changed how time felt. In the palace, time had always been sharp, segmented, and monitored. Every day carried consequence. Here, consequence loosened its grip. Weeks passed without decision. Months passed without judgment. In this space, Wu Zetian discovered a rare condition: time without immediate demand. This did not make her passive, it made her patient in a deeper sense. Patience no longer served survival alone. It became reflection. She watched how others around her changed under prolonged quiet. Some grew smaller, retreating inward until even their thoughts seemed cautious. Others surrendered completely, letting routine erase the outlines of who they once were. Wu Zetian did neither. Instead, she preserved attention without tension. She remembered what the palace had taught her about systems and observation, but now she applied that understanding inward. She began to notice how identity loosens when no one is watching, and how clarity can form when urgency dissolves. The convent did not demand obedience to power, it demanded surrender to time. Wu Zetian complied outwardly while remaining inwardly alert. In the silence, she reviewed the unspoken lessons of her earlier life. She saw more clearly how ambition had destroyed others by forcing them into visibility too soon. She saw how reputation had trapped people inside roles they could not escape. And she saw how being forgotten had freed her from both danger and expectation. Historians later struggled with this period because it left so little trace.
That absence of evidence has often been interpreted as insignificance. But significance is not always proportional to documentation. Some transformations occur precisely because nothing interrupts them. In the convent, Wu Zetian's mind did not sharpen toward action, it widened toward understanding. She became comfortable with slow change, comfortable with existing beyond recognition. This comfort was not resignation, it was recalibration. She was no longer measuring herself against the palace's standards, she was allowing time itself to become her teacher. Time taught her that systems decay not through rebellion, but through rigidity, that structures fail when they cannot adapt to what they have forgotten. And forgetting, she realized, was not always permanent, it was conditional. People forgot what they believed no longer mattered. When circumstances shifted, forgotten things could become relevant again. The convent, then, was not removing her from history, it was placing her into suspension. The world moved on, the palace changed, power rearranged itself, and through it all, Wu Zetian remained still, accumulating endurance. By the time historians later noticed her return, they would assume something miraculous had occurred. But nothing sudden was happening here. This was preparation so quiet that even history overlooked it. Falling had removed her from the stage. Time, slowly and patiently, was preparing her for a role that did not yet exist. And in the soft, repetitive silence of the convent, Wu Zetian learned the most important lesson of all. Survival is not always about holding on. Sometimes it is about letting the world forget you until it needs you again.
While Wu Zetian lived within the quiet repetition of the convent, the world beyond its walls did not remain still. History rarely pauses simply because one life has been set aside. Power continues to shift, alliances rearrange themselves, and the structures that once felt permanent begin to show small signs of strain. In the Tang court, time brought changes that no one could fully control. New concerns emerged, old certainties weakened. The palace, which had once seemed stable and self-contained, slowly adjusted to pressures both internal and unseen. These changes were not dramatic enough to be recorded as turning points. They appeared instead as subtle inconveniences, quiet uncertainties, and the growing sense that familiar patterns no longer explained everything. In moments like these, systems begin to search their memory. They look backward not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity. The palace remembered past solutions, past figures, past arrangements that had once restored balance. It remembered what had been set aside, not because it was important then, but because it might be useful now. Somewhere within this slow reassessment, the silence surrounding Wu Zetian shifted. Her disappearance had once felt complete. Now it felt provisional. The palace did not summon her immediately. It did not announce regret or recognition. Instead, it hesitated. And hesitation in a system built on certainty is meaningful. Wu Zetian remained in the convent, unchanged in her outward life. She could not see the palace's growing uncertainty. She could not hear its quiet recalculations. But endurance has a way of preparing people for moments they cannot anticipate. By living beyond expectation, she had preserved herself intact. She had not hardened into bitterness. She had not dissolved into obscurity. She had remained present to time itself. This presence mattered. When the world outside begins to shift, those who have learned to endure without urgency are often the most ready to respond. Historians later would frame Wu Zetian's return as improbable, even shocking, but from within the logic of history, it followed a familiar pattern. Systems under strain revisit what they once dismissed. They reconsider what they believed was finished. The convent had not erased Wu Zetian, it had held her in reserve. At the close of Chapter 3, nothing has yet happened. Wu Zetian is still absent from court. The palace has not acted. History remains quiet, but the meaning of her absence has changed. Falling was not the end. It was a delay shaped by time, silence, and shifting need. The world is beginning to move again, and when it does, it will look for what it once believed it no longer required. Wu Zetian does not know this yet. She continues her life of quiet repetition, unaware that the conditions which once erased her are slowly rearranging themselves. The chapter ends not with action, but with readiness, not with return, but with the quiet certainty that disappearance has not finished its work, it has only changed its direction. She did not return with an army. She returned with patience. History often prepares us to expect power to announce itself loudly, with banners, weapons, and sudden disruption. But Wu Zetian's return followed a different logic, one far quieter and far more difficult to notice. When the palace began to shift again, it did not do so dramatically. It adjusted the way old structures always do, by reaching back into what they remembered working before. Emperor Gaozong ascended in a court still shaped by his father's shadow. He inherited not only authority, but uncertainty. The Tang system had been stable, but stability is not permanence. As Gaozong's reign began, familiar patterns felt insufficient. Decisions required support. Balance required trusted figures. And in moments like these, memory becomes selective. The palace remembered Wu Zetian not as a threat, not as a failure, but as something unresolved. She had not resisted removal. She had not demanded return. She had simply endured absence. That endurance made her safe to recall. When she was summoned back to court, it was not framed as a reversal or a correction. It was presented as necessity. Her return carried no spectacle, no announcement of ambition, no claim to past injustice. She re-entered the palace quietly, as she had once entered it for the first time. But the palace she returned to was not the same one she had left. Time had altered its memory. Wu Zetian did not challenge this memory. She stepped into it. She accepted a position that appeared modest, familiar, and unthreatening. This was not deception, it was continuity. The court saw her as someone predictable because it believed it already knew her. That belief mattered more than rank. Emperor Gaozong did not elevate her immediately. He did not grant sudden authority. Instead, he allowed proximity. And proximity in imperial politics is where influence grows quietly. Wu Zetian had learned long ago that closeness to power mattered more than title. She had also learned that power prefers those who do not force it to defend itself. Her patience did not signal weakness, it signaled reliability. The palace remembered her as someone who did not disrupt order, and so it welcomed her back into its rhythm. This return did not feel like conquest, it felt like restoration. A missing piece sliding back into place. No one feared it because no one saw it as change, yet change was already happening. Wu Zetian did not speak of transformation. She did not promise reform. She listened, she remembered, she adapted. Time had taught her that systems rarely resist what feels familiar, and her return was framed entirely as familiarity. She was not returning to take, she was returning to serve. That distinction allowed the palace to lower its guard. In truth,
The most powerful returns never announce themselves. They arrive disguised as continuity. Wu Zetian's patience had prepared her for this moment, not by sharpening ambition, but by teaching restraint. She understood that asking permission was unnecessary when memory itself was opening the door. Her return was not an act of defiance, it was the natural consequence of being remembered at the right moment. And as she resumed her place within the court, the palace believed it was simply restoring balance. It did not yet understand that balance, once restored, can shift.
Closeness does not announce itself. It develops in shared silence, in routines repeated without tension, in the absence of resistance. Wu Zetian understood this instinctively as she resumed life within the Tang court. She did not seek the center of attention, nor did she retreat from proximity. She positioned herself where listening mattered more than speaking. Emperor Gaozong, still finding his footing, required steadiness more than spectacle. He was surrounded by tradition, expectation, and the memory of stronger figures who had ruled before him. In such an environment, reassurance became influence. Wu Zetian offered that reassurance without making it visible. She remembered details others overlooked. She anticipated needs without presenting demands. Over time, this created a rhythm between presence and trust. The court did not interpret this as power, it interpreted it as reliability. That distinction allowed influence to grow without resistance. In imperial politics, authority often hardens into formality, while influence remains fluid. Wu Zetian remained fluid. She did not insist on recognition. She allowed recognition to arrive on its own schedule. Her patience aligned with the emperor's need for stability. Decisions made in her presence felt calmer, more grounded. This was not manipulation, it was alignment. She had learned how systems relax around those who do not threaten them. The palace, still watching, categorized her again, this time not as absent or merely stable, but as useful. Usefulness within the court was a form of protection. It justified proximity, it normalized presence, and presence over time reshapes memory. Wu Zetian's return did not rewrite her past, it reframed it. What had once looked like disappearance now appeared as discretion. What had once been interpreted as passivity now read as composure. Memory, being flexible, adjusted accordingly. The emperor trusted those who reduced uncertainty. Wu Zetian reduced uncertainty by never forcing outcomes. She waited until outcomes presented themselves. Her influence was felt in pauses, in decisions deferred rather than rushed, in tensions eased rather than confronted. The palace did not resist this because it did not feel imposed, it felt natural. Influence that arrives without force often goes unquestioned. Wu Zetian had become close not by advancing, but by remaining. This closeness was not intimacy in the romantic sense often imagined later. It was operational. It functioned within the daily mechanics of governance. It did not disrupt hierarchy. It supported it. That support made it indispensable. As months passed, her presence became assumed, and what is assumed rarely appears dangerous. In this way, patience transformed proximity into quiet authority, not declared, not challenged, simply present. History often focuses on moments when power is seized. It rarely notices moments when power settles. Wu Zetian's influence settled into place without ceremony. The palace continued to watch,
but it no longer questioned what it had already accepted. And acceptance, once granted, reshapes the future more effectively than command.
Influence is undeniable when its absence is felt more strongly than its presence. This was the quiet turning point of Wu Zetian's return. There was no single decree that announced her importance, no title that suddenly elevated her above others. Instead, decisions began to feel incomplete when she was not nearby. Conversations paused until her presence restored their rhythm. These were not signs of authority as history usually records them. They were signs of dependence forming gently, almost invisibly. Emperor Gaozong did not consciously transfer power. He grew accustomed to clarity arriving after listening, to calm following deliberation, to balance emerging without force. Wu Zetian's influence had merged with process. It no longer needed recognition to function. The court adapted to this without resistance because adaptation felt easier than disruption. Officials adjusted their expectations. Timing shifted. Consultation became routine. None of this required announcement. Habits rarely do. The palace, always attentive to stability, accepted what stabilized it. Wu Zetian did not claim space. Space reorganized around her. This distinction mattered. When influence claims, it provokes defense. When it is accommodated, it reshapes quietly. Her patience had matured into inevitability, not because she demanded it, but because time had aligned memory, proximity, and need. The palace had once categorized her as stable. Now it experienced her as necessary. Necessity is the threshold where influence approaches power. Yet still, nothing appeared confrontational. There was no resistance to overcome because there was no visible advance. Wu Zetian continued to listen more than speak, to respond rather than initiate, to wait rather than insist. And in doing so, she allowed others to feel ownership of decisions she had quietly shaped. This shared ownership diffused fear. It preserved harmony, and harmony in imperial systems is often mistaken for order. By the end of Chapter 4, Wu Zetian had returned without asking permission and without forcing recognition. Her influence was not written into law but into routine, not secured by force but by trust accumulated over time. History would later struggle to identify the moment when she crossed from presence into power. That struggle is revealing. It means the transition was seamless. Power did not arrive as an interruption, it settled as a continuation. The palace believed it was maintaining balance. In reality, balance had already shifted. Wu Zetian had not overturned the system. She had entered it so completely that it no longer distinguished between her influence and its own function. This is the most enduring form of return. Not conquest, not rebellion, but alignment so precise that resistance never forms. As the chapter closes, the palace remains quiet. Governance continues. Decisions are made, and Wu Zetian's presence is assumed, unremarkable, indispensable. The world still does not call her powerful. It simply operates as if she must be there. And that is how patience completes its work. At some point, the emperor was still alive, but decisions were no longer his. There is rarely a single moment when authority leaves a person's hands. It does not announce itself with ceremony or conflict. Instead, it thins out, dispersing quietly into habit, into routine, into the unspoken understanding of who truly carries weight in a room. In the Tang court,
This transition unfolded without alarm. Emperor Gaozong continued to sit upon the throne, his seal still pressed into documents, his presence still visible in ritual and form. Yet the rhythm of governance had changed. Decisions began to arrive already shaped. Debates softened before they reached him. Outcomes felt settled before his approval was requested. This was not a coup. It was a recalibration so gradual that no one felt compelled to resist it. Wu Zetian did not step forward to claim regency. She did not issue commands in her own name. She allowed the machinery of governance to adjust itself around her presence. Ministers, accustomed to stability, noticed that clarity emerged more easily when her counsel was present. Problems felt smaller, timing felt more precise. Over time, they began to seek that clarity intentionally, though rarely explicitly. The emperor, increasingly burdened by illness and uncertainty, welcomed relief without framing it as surrender. He remained sovereign in title, but sovereignty in practice had begun to circulate. Wu Zetian understood that power moves most efficiently when it appears to be shared. She did not replace the emperor's authority, she absorbed its labor. In doing so, she became indispensable. The court did not interpret this as an erosion of imperial power. It experienced it as continuity. Governance still functioned, rituals remained intact, stability persisted, and stability above all else is what imperial systems protect. When decisions flowed through Wu Zetian, they did so without friction. There were no sharp turns, no ideological ruptures, just a subtle shift in where certainty resided. Officials adjusted their habits accordingly. They brought matters to her first, not as a challenge to hierarchy, but as a way of ensuring smooth passage. This behavior did not spread by decree, it spread by imitation. Influence, once normalized, reproduces itself quietly. The emperor did not lose respect, he lost necessity, and necessity is the true engine of authority. Wu Zetian did not frame this moment as triumph, she treated it as maintenance. Power, she understood, is most secure when it feels like care rather than control. The palace continued to watch, but it no longer searched for signs of disruption, it searched for reassurance, and reassurance consistently arrived through her. By the end of this phase, history had not yet changed names or titles, but governance had shifted hands. The emperor still lived, the throne still stood, yet the decisions shaping the empire now emerged from a different center, one defined not by command, but by quiet competence. This is how power slides, not forward, not backward, but sideways, until it rests where resistance is lowest. And when history later looked back, it struggled to pinpoint the exact moment of change. That struggle is the evidence. The transition was seamless. Authority did not collapse, it drifted. And Wu Zetian, without announcing herself, had become the axis around which the Tang court now turned.
Regency does not always declare itself. Sometimes it emerges simply because someone begins to do the work that others quietly stop doing. In the Tang court, this transition unfolded without ceremony. Emperor Gaozong remained present in form, but his involvement in the weight of governance gradually thinned. Illness weakened his stamina. Repetition exhausted his attention. What once required deliberate decision now required endurance, and endurance is not sustained by authority alone. Wu Zetian understood this shift intuitively. She did not frame herself as a replacement, she framed herself as continuity. Matters arrived at her attention because they lingered there naturally. Officials did not feel as though they were bypassing the emperor. They felt as though they were preserving the smooth operation of the court. This distinction was critical. No one likes to believe they are participating in change. They prefer to believe they are preventing disruption. Wu Zetian allowed this belief to remain intact. She did not alter the language of power. She altered its tempo. Decisions slowed enough to feel careful, but not so slow as to invite concern. Consultations became routine. Clarifications became expected. Over time, these habits formed a new center of gravity. The emperor's approval became the final seal rather than the source. This did not diminish his dignity. It redistributed effort. Wu Zetian became the one who held complexity while allowing the emperor to retain symbolic clarity. In imperial systems, symbols matter. They anchor legitimacy. Wu Zetian protected those symbols rather than challenging them. This protection made her indispensable. The court began to experience governance as something that functioned best when filtered through her judgment. This was not because she imposed will, but because she reduced friction. Problems arrived tangled. They left ordered. That ordering created trust. Trust created dependence. And dependence, once normalized, rarely announces itself. The palace did not feel governed by her. It felt steadied by her. In this way, regency took shape without name or proclamation. It existed as practice rather than position. Wu Zetian did not claim authority. Authority accrued to her because it found a place to rest. The emperor, still respected, still honored, became increasingly removed from the strain of daily rule. This removal was not forced. It was welcomed. It preserved his health. It preserved the image of continuity, and it allowed the empire to function without visible fracture. History later would describe this period as transition, but to those living inside it, it felt like relief. Relief is rarely resisted. Wu Zetian's patience had prepared her to carry weight without displaying it. She had learned that visible power attracts challenge, while functional power attracts reliance. By the time anyone might have questioned the arrangement, it already felt normal, and normality, once established, is difficult to undo. This is how regency forms in silence, not through ambition, but through assumption, not through declaration, but through habit. Wu Zetian did not become regent by stepping forward. She became regent because everything continued to work when she remained where she was. There comes a moment in every slow transfer of power when recognition arrives too late to matter. In the Tang court, this moment did not arrive as shock or outrage. It arrived as realization. Officials began to sense that decisions no longer moved unless they passed through Wu Zetian. Not because she demanded control, but because control had quietly settled there. The emperor remained visible, respected, and present in ceremony. Yet when uncertainty arose, eyes turned elsewhere. This shift did not provoke alarm because it felt organic. It felt like the natural result of time, illness, and accumulated habit. By the time anyone could have named what was happening, naming it would have changed nothing. Power had already relocated into routine. The court did not resist because resistance requires a clear target. Wu Zetian offered none. She had not violated protocol. She had not overturned hierarchy. She had simply become necessary. And necessity is difficult to oppose without destabilizing everything around it.
Those who noticed earliest said little. To speak would have required confrontation, and confrontation would have threatened the stability they had come to rely on. Silence once again protected continuity. Emperor Gaozong himself did not object. He did not perceive loss, he perceived relief. The weight of governance had grown heavy, and Wu Zetian had taken it without complaint. This acceptance finalized the transition. When the sovereign no longer insists on deciding, the system adjusts accordingly. Authority does not vanish, it finds a new holder. Wu Zetian did not celebrate this shift. She did not accelerate it. She allowed it to complete itself. History often searches for ambition in moments like this, but ambition was no longer required. The work was already being done. The palace functioned, the empire remained intact, and the person ensuring that continuity did so without title or announcement. By the end of Chapter 5, power had fully changed hands without ever appearing to move. The emperor still lived, the court still bowed, the rituals still unfolded, but governance now flowed through a different center. This is why later generations would struggle to pinpoint the moment Wu Zetian became ruler in all but name. There was no moment, only a gradual alignment of necessity, trust, and habit. When history finally noticed, it found nothing to undo. The arrangement had become normal, and normality, once accepted, rewrites memory itself. What once seemed unthinkable now appeared inevitable. Wu Zetian had not seized power. She had allowed it to arrive where it could function best. As the chapter closes, the palace rests in a state of quiet equilibrium. The emperor presides, Wu Zetian governs, and no one speaks of change, because change has already finished happening.
China had never prepared a throne for a woman, so she took it anyway. Not by storming the palace, not by breaking tradition in public spectacle, but by allowing tradition itself to arrive at a moment it could no longer explain. By the time the idea of Wu Zetian as emperor began to circulate, it did not feel radical to those living inside the court. It felt overdue. For years, governance had already flowed through her. Decisions had already carried her imprint. Stability had already depended on her presence. The dragon throne had not been waiting for a woman, but the empire had been waiting for continuity. Titles lag behind reality. History often records change only after it is fully settled. Wu Zetian understood this. She did not rush to claim what time was already delivering. Instead, she allowed inevitability to mature. The Tang court had grown accustomed to her authority without naming it. When the emperor's death finally removed the last symbolic barrier, the question was no longer whether a woman could rule, but whether the system could continue without her. That question answered itself quietly. Rituals adapted, language shifted, precedent was reinterpreted rather than rejected. Wu Zetian did not frame her ascent as defiance of gender. She framed it as preservation of order. This distinction mattered. Resistance thrives on disruption, not on continuity. By presenting herself as the natural extension of existing governance, she made opposition appear reckless rather than righteous. The throne did not change hands dramatically, it changed meanings. What had once been unthinkable became administratively sensible. The empire did not celebrate novelty, it accepted necessity. Wu Zetian ascended not as an exception to history, but as its logical outcome. This is why the moment feels strangely quiet. There were no cheers echoing through chronicles, no sweeping declarations of a new age, just a recalibration of language to match reality. She took the dragon throne not because China had prepared for her, but because China had already been living under her rule. The crown arrived late. Authority had arrived years earlier. In this way, the most extraordinary event in Chinese imperial history unfolded with almost no noise at all. A woman became emperor, and the world continued. That continuity was her greatest achievement, not the breaking of tradition, but its absorption, not rebellion, but completion. As Chapter 6 begins, power has reached its name. Wu Zetian no longer governs without the crown. She governs because the crown has finally learned where it belongs. When Wu Zetian finally took the dragon throne, she did not pretend that nothing had changed. She understood that continuity alone was not enough. The empire required language that could hold the weight of what had occurred. And so, she did something both subtle and irreversible. She changed the name of the dynasty. The Tang Dynasty, which had carried her rise and shaped her ascent, was set aside, not rejected, but concluded. In its place, she proclaimed the Zhao Dynasty, not as an act of conquest, but as a re-anchoring of legitimacy. This was not symbolic vanity, it was structural clarity. Names define memory. By naming a new dynasty, Wu Zetian made it impossible to frame her reign as a temporary deviation. She transformed the unprecedented into the official. The court adapted carefully. Rituals were revised, titles adjusted, language recalibrated. None of this happened abruptly. It unfolded with deliberation, allowing resistance to dissolve before it could harden. Wu Zetian understood that systems resist rupture but accept translation. She translated power into a form the empire could recognize. Her reign did not announce itself as a revolution led by a woman. It presented itself as the continuation of order under a new, clarified name. This reframing neutralized opposition. To oppose her now was not to challenge a person, but to challenge a dynasty. And dynasties are harder to argue against than individuals. Wu Zetian's authority no longer relied on proximity or habit alone. It was embedded in structure, law, ritual, and memory aligned around her. She governed openly now, but without theatrics. Her voice did not grow louder. Her presence did not demand attention. The empire adjusted because adjustment felt safer than resistance. Officials learned new formulas. Records adopted new headings. Time moved forward without pause. In doing so, Wu Zetian accomplished something rare. She turned an anomaly into precedent. A woman on the throne was no longer an exception to be explained. It was a reality to be administered. This is how permanence forms, not through force, but through normalization. By the time anyone questioned whether this should have been possible, it already was. The Zhao dynasty existed. The dragon throne had a woman's name attached to it, and the empire continued to function. That continuation silenced doubt more effectively than argument ever could. Wu Zetian did not ask history for permission. She structured history so that permission was no longer required. The crown did not rest on her as a symbol of conquest. It rested as confirmation of a reality that had already been lived. And in this calm, methodical transition, she ensured that her rule would not be remembered as an interruption, but as a chapter of its own. Once the dragon throne accepted her name, history did not react with outrage or awe. It adjusted. That adjustment is what makes this moment so easy to overlook and so difficult to reverse.
The empire did not pause to debate whether this should have been possible. It moved forward as empires always do, concerned with harvests, borders, appointments, and stability. Wu Zetian understood this instinctively. She did not demand celebration. She did not invite scrutiny. She allowed governance to continue as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, and in doing so, she made the extraordinary permanent. The court learned how to speak of her reign without emphasis. Officials learned how to write her name without hesitation. Rituals learned how to accommodate her presence without explanation. Each repetition softened resistance. Each routine made the unthinkable familiar. History often imagines that barriers fall when they are attacked. In reality, many barriers dissolve when they are ignored. Wu Zetian did not argue for her right to rule. She ruled, and by ruling calmly, consistently, and without interruption, she removed the need for argument altogether. The empire adapted not because it was convinced, but because it was functioning. Function silences doubt more effectively than persuasion. Over time, the question of gender receded into irrelevance. What mattered was continuity. Taxes were collected, orders were executed, peace was maintained. The Dragon Throne did not protest, it held. This quiet acceptance is the true climax of Wu Zetian's story. Not the moment she took power, but the moment power stopped noticing that it had changed form. When history finally looked back, it would struggle to remember why this had once seemed impossible. That forgetting is itself a measure of success. Wu Zetian did not merely occupy the throne, she normalized it beneath her, and normalization is stronger than conquest. As Chapter 6 closes, the empire rests in a new equilibrium. A woman rules China, and the night remains calm. The lamps are lit, the records are written, the world continues. And in that continuation, Wu Zetian's achievement settles fully into history, not as disruption, but as fact. Her rule was not gentle, but it was stable. This distinction matters more than judgment allows. When Wu Zetian governed as emperor, the empire did not drift into chaos, nor did it erupt into rebellion. It quieted. Roads remained open. Taxes arrived on time. Orders were obeyed with efficiency rather than enthusiasm. The machinery of state moved smoothly, even when the atmosphere felt heavy. Wu Zetian did not govern through warmth. She governed through clarity. Laws were enforced consistently. Expectations were unmistakable. Consequences arrived without hesitation. In such an environment, uncertainty had little space to grow. Fear existed, but it was structured. It followed rules. It did not wander. This kind of fear does not shout, it settles. And when fear settles, disorder recedes. The empire learned how to behave under her rule. Officials measured their words carefully. Loyalty was not assumed, it was demonstrated. Surveillance was present, but it was not erratic, it was systematic. Wu Zetian understood that stability requires predictability more than affection. She did not ask the empire to love her, she asked it to function. And it did. This is uncomfortable for modern audiences who seek moral clarity in history, but Wu Zetian's reign resists simple evaluation. It invites observation instead. Under her administration,
The Tang transition did not fracture the state, it consolidated it. Bureaucracy tightened, merit mattered more visibly, performance replaced pedigree in many appointments. This did not make the empire kinder, it made it more legible. People knew where they stood. And knowing where one stands, even in fear, often feels safer than uncertainty. Wu Zetian did not cultivate terror for its own sake. She cultivated order. Fear was a byproduct, not the goal. And because it was bounded, it did not spiral into chaos. The empire remained calm not because it was free of tension, but because tension had direction. The night in the capital was quiet. Lamps burned. Records were kept. Grain moved. Borders held. This calm did not mean peace in the emotional sense. It meant continuity. History often conflates gentleness with goodness and harshness with failure. Wu Zetian complicates that equation. Her empire did not collapse under the weight of her methods. It endured. And endurance in imperial history is a rare achievement. As Chapter 7 opens, we do not praise her, we do not condemn her. We simply watch how a calm empire can exist alongside fear, and how stability sometimes demands a price that is paid quietly over time.
Order under Wu Zetian was not an abstract concept. It was experienced daily in small, repeated actions that shaped how people moved, spoke, and decided. Officials arrived earlier. Reports were written more carefully. Silence lingered longer in rooms where judgment was expected. This was not because everyone feared punishment at every moment, but because everyone understood the boundaries. Wu Zetian made boundaries visible, and when boundaries are clear, people rarely test them. The court functioned with a kind of disciplined calm. Meetings were efficient, delays were rare, confusion was corrected quickly, often before it spread. This efficiency created admiration, even among those who felt uneasy. People respected what worked. They also watched it closely. Respect and caution lived side by side. Wu Zetian did not soften her presence to invite affection. She allowed distance to do its work. Distance kept authority intact. It prevented familiarity from eroding discipline. The empire learned to read her rule through outcome rather than intention. Harvests were recorded. Promotions followed performance. Dismissals followed failure. The pattern was consistent. That consistency made fear predictable, and predictable fear does not paralyze, it regulates. Citizens adapted. Officials adapted. Even critics adapted, choosing restraint over confrontation. The calm that settled across the empire was not the calm of comfort, it was the calm of alignment. Everyone moved within understood limits. Wu Zetian's administration did not ask people to agree with it, it asked them to comply. Compliance, when evenly enforced, creates a quiet order that feels durable. This durability impressed contemporaries. They might not have loved her, but they trusted the system she enforced. Trust, in this sense, did not mean emotional security, it meant reliability. When rules are applied without favoritism, fear loses its edge, it becomes routine. Wu Zetian's intelligence services, often remembered with discomfort, operated as part of this system. They were not omnipresent shadows, but structured mechanisms. Their existence reminded the court that observation was possible, not constant. This distinction mattered. It kept anxiety from becoming chaos. The empire remained watchful, not panicked. As time passed, this atmosphere produced a strange dual response. Wu Zetian was admired for her effectiveness and feared for her decisiveness. Neither feeling dominated fully. They balanced, and balance, even when tense, sustains order. The emperor did not rule by charm, she ruled by function, and function, repeated daily, reshapes culture. People internalized expectations, they corrected themselves. This reduced the need for intervention. Wu Zetian's presence loomed not because she intervened constantly, but because she did not need to. Order had learned how to maintain itself. As Chapter 7 continues, we see an empire that is calm, watchful, and efficient, not gentle, not cruel, simply operating. And in that operation lies the quiet truth of her reign. Stability was achieved not by erasing fear, but by giving it form.
Stability, when sustained for long enough, begins to reshape memory itself. Under Wu Zetian's rule, the empire grew accustomed to calm that did not require reassurance. People learned to expect order rather than hope for it. Over time, this expectation settled into daily life. Markets opened without anxiety. Couriers traveled without interruption. Appointments followed predictable patterns. The empire felt held together, not by affection, but by consistency. Yet every form of stability carries a cost that becomes visible only after the urgency fades. In Wu Zetian's China, the cost was subtle. It appeared not as rebellion, but as restraint. Speech narrowed. Initiative softened. People learned when not to speak as carefully as when to act. This was not paralysis, it was calculation. The empire functioned well, but it functioned cautiously. Fear, once bounded and regulated, began to seep inward. It shaped ambition, it shaped trust. Wu Zetian did not intend to create a fearful culture. She intended to create a reliable one. And reliability, when achieved through vigilance, teaches people to internalize watchfulness. Over time, that watchfulness becomes habit. Habit becomes culture. Culture persists beyond any single ruler. This is the quiet legacy of her reign. Not cruelty remembered, nor benevolence celebrated, but a calm system that asked its people to be careful. History often debates whether her methods were justified, but the empire she left behind did not immediately answer that question. It continued. Order did not collapse with her passing. That endurance complicates moral judgment. It suggests that fear, when disciplined, can coexist with stability. It also suggests that stability purchased this way leaves a residue. Wu Zetian's calm empire did not invite intimacy, it invited compliance. For many, that trade felt acceptable. For some, it felt heavy. Both experiences existed simultaneously. As Chapter 7 closes, we are left not with condemnation or praise, but with an atmosphere. Lamps still glow, records remain meticulous, the night is quiet, and beneath that quiet lies the understanding that order, once established, asks to be maintained. Whether that maintenance becomes burden or protection depends on who inherits it. Wu Zetian ruled long enough for her methods to outlast her presence. That is the measure of her power, and the question she leaves behind. Stability endured, fear lingered, the empire slept. When she died, the empire did not collapse, it simply exhaled. There was no sudden unraveling, no scramble for control, no night of chaos to mark the end of Wu Zetian's reign. The palace did not shake, the borders did not fracture. Records continued to be written, Lamps continued to burn through the night. What ended was not order, but tension. The long vigilance that had shaped daily life slowly loosened, not all at once, gently, as if the empire itself had been holding its breath for years without realizing it. Wu Zetian had ruled long enough for her presence to feel permanent, and when permanence quietly departs, it leaves behind a silence that is neither relief nor fear, but space. In that space, the Tang court began to remember itself. Titles were restored, names shifted back, ritual language softened. None of this was framed as rejection, it was framed as return. History prefers to move forward by calling its reversals restorations. The empire did not speak of undoing Wu Zetian, it spoke of resuming balance. Her methods did not vanish overnight. The systems she tightened remained functional. The habits she instilled continued to guide behavior. But the atmosphere changed. The sense of being watched receded. The need for constant calculation relaxed. People began to speak a little more freely, not because fear was gone, but because it was no longer everywhere. Wu Zetian's death did not erase her influence, it redistributed it. Some of what she built endured because it worked. Some dissolved because it was no longer necessary. This is how empires metabolize strong rulers. They keep what stabilizes and release what constrains. Wu Zetian herself faded into stillness without spectacle. There was no dramatic reckoning at the end, no final speech, no moment of public regret or triumph. Her story did not close with noise, it closed with quiet continuity. And that quiet is important. It tells us how fully she had been integrated into the functioning of the state. When a ruler's absence creates panic, it means the system depended on them alone. When a ruler's absence creates calm, it means the system learned to stand. Wu Zetian left behind a state that could breathe again because it had been disciplined enough to survive. History often asks whether she was good or cruel, justified or excessive, but the empire she left behind answered a different question. Did it endure? And the answer for a time was yes. As the night settles over the capital after her passing, nothing dramatic happens. The guards change shifts, the scribes finish their work, the palace grows quiet again. And in that quiet, Wu Zetian's life moves from presence into memory, from authority into legacy. The throne does not mourn, it waits. And the empire, for the first time in many years, rests without needing to watch itself. Long after the records were sealed and the palace returned to familiar rhythms, Wu Zetian's name continued to move quietly through history. Not loudly, not insistently. It appeared in margins, in debates, in cautious footnotes that struggled to decide what to do with her. She did not fit easily into categories history prefers. She was neither a brief anomaly nor a simple triumph. She was duration, and duration leaves behind texture rather than verdicts. Over time, storytellers softened her edges. Chroniclers adjusted their language. Some reduced her to warnings. Others elevated her to symbols. But the lived reality of her reign resisted both extremes. What endured most clearly was not her ambition or her severity, but the calm that followed her passing. That calm became a lens through which later generations quietly reassessed her. A ruler whose absence does not destabilize the state forces history to pause. It invites reflection rather than reaction. Wu Zetian's legacy did not demand agreement, it invited consideration. Women in later centuries would encounter her name not as permission, but as proof. Proof that the unprepared can still occur. proof that structures once thought fixed can bend without breaking. Yet even this proof remained understated. Her story did not become a rallying cry, it became a reference point, something to be noticed, then set down again. This quiet endurance mirrors the way her life unfolded. She entered the palace unnoticed. She ruled without spectacle. She left without upheaval. And so her memory learned to travel the same way, gently. As the night deepens, history itself seems to slow. Questions about judgment lose urgency. Curiosity softens into acceptance. Wu Zetian does not ask us to decide how we feel about her. She asks us to notice how much can change without noise. The empire she shaped eventually transformed again, as all empires do. But the trace of her reign remained embedded in its understanding of possibility, not as disruption, but as expansion. The world did not end when she ruled. It continued. And that continuation is the final lesson her story offers. For those listening now, in the quiet hours, this lesson does not need to be held tightly. It can simply rest. Like the empire after her death, you do not need to watch anymore. The throne is quiet, the night is wide, and history, having spoken softly, allows you to sleep.